You know, when you comb through all of ancient literature, there are some images that just stick with you, but few are as powerful or as downright baffling as this one, the Great Red Dragon from the Book of Revelation. I mean, it's a vision that has fascinated and, let's be honest, haunted people for nearly 2,000 years. But what did it actually mean to the people who first heard it?
And behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. Wow, it's just an unforgettable image, right? 7 heads, 10 horns, that fiery red color, and it all shows up as a wonder in heaven. Now, it might sound like some random monster from mythology, but every single detail you see here is a loaded symbol. To really get what's going on, we have to become detectives and decode the original blueprint.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Before we can even start to talk about the different interpretations, we have to look at the specific words the author John chose to use in the original Greek. See, this isn't just any dragon. It's a very specific kind of being, built from some very carefully chosen language.
First up, the main event, drakon. Now, this word wasn't just generic monster. For someone in the first century reading this, especially someone familiar with the Hebrew scriptures, it would have instantly brought to mind the word tanin. And a tanin was a massive sea creature, a symbol of primordial chaos, a symbol of immense, hostile power, kind of like the creatures that were used to represent empires like Egypt or Babylon. So right off the bat, we're talking about a symbol for a huge, opposing force.
Next, its color, pyros, or fiery red. And this isn't just any old red. It's the exact same word used a few chapters earlier in Revelation to describe the second horse of the apocalypse, the red horse. You know, the one whose rider was given the power to take peace from the earth and make people kill each other. So this color is immediately tied to violence, conflict, and war.
And finally, let's talk about its crowns. Diadema. Okay, this is a really crucial detail. The Greek language had another word for a crown, stephanos, which was more like a wreath given to a champion in a game. But a diadema, that was different. That was a royal diadem, a symbol of sovereign, kingly authority. This dragon isn't just a winner, it's a claimant to the throne. It's saying, I have the right to rule.
So, with those terms in our toolkit, let's explore the first major interpretation. This is probably the one you're most familiar with. It's the traditional reading that sees the dragon as a symbol of a great cosmic enemy, a hostile power that's ultimately defeated by a divine victory.
In this view, the case seems pretty straightforward. I mean, just a few verses later, the text flat out identifies the dragon as that old serpent called the devil and Satan. Its main job is being the kategor, which is a Greek legal term for a prosecutor and accuser in a courtroom. The red color points to the bloodshed of its rebellion. The heads and horns, those symbolize the corrupt worldly empires it controls. And its tail, which drags down a third of the stars, is seen as a symbol of false prophecy, just like the prophet Isaiah called a false teacher the tail. And here's the kicker. Its defeat isn't just some big battle. It's a judicial act. It gets kicked out of heaven because its legal standing as the accuser has been totally nullified by the victory of Christ.
So it really seems like an open and shut case, doesn't it? But the text calls the dragon a samion, a sign or a wonder, and that one little word has opened the door to a radically different and honestly pretty astonishing interpretation. So the question is there another way to read this wonder?
And that brings us to a second interpretation, one that completely flips the entire symbol on its head. This reading makes the argument that if the dragon is a wonder in heaven, then maybe it's not a sign of evil at all, but a magnificent sign of spiritual power, and specifically, the redeemed church. I know, it sounds shocking, but let's just see how the argument works.
Okay, just look at this. In this second view, every single element we just defined gets completely inverted. The wonder is no longer a sign of evil, but a heavenly marvel. That fiery red color, it's not bloodshed, it's redemption through the blood of Christ. The 7 heads become a symbol of perfected wisdom, the 10 horns, a symbol of complete spiritual authority, and those royal crowns, they represent the sovereign rulership promised to the redeemed, who are called kings and priests.
And this, of course, raises a huge question. It feels impossible. How on earth can one single symbol, a great red dragon, hold 2 completely opposite meanings? How can it represent both the ultimate enemy and the community of the redeemed? Well, it turns out the answer is buried deep in the symbol's history.
The key that unlocks this entire puzzle lies with that Hebrew word we mentioned earlier, taninim, the word that drakon so often translates. Because in the Old Testament,
This dragon figure has a pretty surprising dual identity. Yeah, it wasn't always the bad guy.
And this duality is right there in the ancient texts for anyone to see. On the one hand, you have prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel using dragon as a symbol for oppressive kings, like Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and the Pharaoh of Egypt. Isaiah talks about a day when God will punish Leviathan, the great dragon of the sea. But then, on the other hand, you go back to the creation story in Genesis, and God creates the great Tanninim, the great sea creatures, and calls them good. In Psalm 148, the Tanninim are specifically told to praise the Lord from the depths of the sea. So they're part of God's majestic creation, not something inherently evil.
So what's the crucial point here? It's this. In this ancient way of thinking, a dragon isn't really a creature. It's a symbol for raw, overwhelming power. It can represent the chaotic, hostile power of an enemy nation, or it can represent the majestic, creative power that's part of God's own creation. The symbol itself is neutral. The real question is, who is wielding that power and why?
This principle, that a symbol's meaning is all about its context, is the key that unlocks this entire vision. And you know what? We don't even have to leave the book of Revelation to see this idea in action. The author does the exact same thing himself, just a few chapters later. Just look at how this plays out. In Revelation 12, we get our great red dragon, which is a wonder that appears in heaven. But then in chapter 17, a scarlet-colored beast that also has 7 heads and 10 horns emerges from the wilderness, from the earth. The location is totally different, heaven versus earth. The color is even a different Greek word, scarlet, which is a color associated with sin. So even though the imagery is super similar, the context paints one as a heavenly sign and the other as a corrupt earthly empire. The author is using the same symbolic toolkit for completely different purposes.
And that leads us to our final and maybe most important takeaway. A symbol, especially in a text as rich and complex as Revelation, isn't some locked box with only one fixed meaning inside. It's much more like a locked door. And its meaning is only revealed by the interpretive key you choose to use, whether that key is historical context, a deep dive into the language, or a different theological framework altogether.
So, this is where we land. The great red dragon can be seen as the ultimate accuser, judicially defeated and cast down. Or it can be seen as a marvelous symbol of the redeemed, empowered by the very blood of the one it was thought to oppose. And this leaves us with one last, really provocative thought. If a symbol this powerful can be so radically inverted, how does that change the way we read all ancient stories? What other monsters out there might just be misunderstood wonders?